Hey, this is Sean Alden recording for Cardsphere.com, and today we're going to be playing some blue-white pool control. So you might have seen this blue-white list going around. There's a bit more. There are a few different variants. You've got some of the more historic variants, where you've got the cards such as Wrath, and you kind of play some History of Benalias, and you do this kind of weird mid-rangey thing, and play some Lyras. And I think it's fine. I'm not some of the cards. I mean, Wrath isn't a great card in the first place, especially he's not really a standard power level, to be honest. He's almost there. He's not quite there. Restoration Angel, that was that's what he wants to be. But and I think for the way the control decks are built at the moment, such as the ones that have been going around Autumn Purgette's list, where she plays the differential Gearhulks and such like, I think that they're starting to be. The problem is they leave themselves a bit vulnerable. They still have creatures who can be hit by removal spells, and the alternative is the approach decks. They're just kind of, I mean, the spell they're relying on to resolve to win the game is a 7 mana sorcery that doesn't do anything twice. So what we're going for instead is something that's a little bit more streamlined. All of our win conditions do something else, and I think it's really good. So I'll start going through some of the cards choices. We've got Ops to give our deck so we can a bit of velocity, go through, try and find some answers, help smooth out some opening hands. Sealaways, I think this card's been talked about enough at the moment. It's one of the best removal spells they've printed for these sort of blue-white control decks in a while. It just kind of answers everything, whether it's the cheaper creatures, which have always been traditionally a problem, something like Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, Bomat Courier, or something that's a bit bigger and scarier, such as Hazoret and Lyras, and pretty much anything. Card's very, very good. It is sometimes awkward that it's an enchantment that sticks around, but just so powerful. Yeah, two's very easy in this deck, and I think it's very good. We've got some Scatter and Negates, just general, kind of a little bit of a split between the two of them, see how they play. Two Search for Azcanters, just very, I think at this point again, the card's pretty well known. Card selection gives a card advantage in the late game, and seeing as we're playing 0 creatures, we are very, very rare to miss on it. We've got two Gideon of the Trials. They've actually been very good recently. The fact that they prevent all the damage from Heart of Kiran is a real, real positive. And the emblem against sort of these weird approach decks are the main ones that comes to mind, where it comes up that you can't die. But also the fact that you can't die to an empty library when they have a Gideon in play can sometimes come up in these super long games. And otherwise, a 4/4 does end the game if it's one of our win conditions, if it gets to that point. We've got these four disallows. I think just the best counter spell that you've got at the moment in standard. Pretty much a mandatory 4 of. We've got some cast outs. In fact, they cycle in the matchups where they aren't very good in their front half is brilliant, and then a flash 4 mana exile anything is great. We've got the three Settler Wreckages. Again, being able to deal up with these wide board states that you see a lot of these decks have at 4 mana is brilliant, and even if people play around them, that normally plays into your Sealaways and cast outs, so really puts your opponent in a bit of an awkward spot. The fact that the extra lands definitely do hurt our syncopates, but otherwise they don't really tend to matter too much, especially when we're in full control of the game. Two Fumigates, we've got the third on the side, but I think two is a good number at the moment. Three Teferi, I mean, he's incredible. Just the fact that he can almost be a 3 mana Planeswalker when some of the points that he comes in. He at 5 loyalty, and you get to hold up your seal away is really important. And when you play him as a 6-drop, you get to have your disallows up. The -3 hitting anything means it's great against something like Godfarer's Gift. You get to -3 their Godfarer's Gift away, which is normally a permanent type that's a bit more difficult to interact with. And just hitting creatures on an empty board state, with your opponent having one creature, can be very good. And the ultimate effectively wins the game by itself. There's a neat little trick, if you haven't heard about it, with Teferi, where once you've emblemed and your opponent has basically no permanents left, you can begin -3 targeting the Teferi itself, putting it back on top of your library, and just make sure that you can't have a deck, because you just make it so even if you have 0 cards in library, you -3, put them on top, and then just draw them for the turn. Alternatively, the Gideon means we can't lose from an empty deck as well. But those are two of our win conditions, as miserable as that is. We got 3 Syncopates. Just a great early game. A 2 mana counter spell that a bit like a Censor, and later on it scales up. And 3 Pull from Tomorrows. This is one of the cards that's a little bit more unique. This list came from Brian Gottlieb on the Game Podcast channel, and he suggested these are just the card that really gets you ahead in control mirrors, and even against the aggro decks when you get to a point where you've got the game under handle and you just need something to really just put the nail in the coffin. Absolutely brilliant card, and just can. It's had a bit of a difficulty finding a tone in standard because of the reliance on Torrential Gearhulk, which doesn't really work with. But it's very, very good, and we hopefully will be putting it to some good use. Our land base is pretty standard. We've got all the blue-white lands, some Imnu Rivulets. The main interaction with an Imnu Rivulet is to keep in mind is the Teferi minus. If there's something you absolutely have to deal with, you can mill it with a Rivulet, so you don't have to deal with it anymore. We've got these Field of Ruins to deal with opponents. Search for Ascanthus is the big one, but otherwise the Legion's Landing, Adanto the First Fault, I believe. Being able to answer that is good. We've got two Meandering Rivers, which I actually think are really important. Having the turn 1 tap land to help smooth out your mana is great. One Memorials of Glory, which is another win condition of sorts, but can also create some jump blockers, can create some blockers for little guys. Very, very sweet little card. A bunch of Plains, and some Zalarin Voids, which I'm trying out. These are in the spots of some Scavenger Grounds because I just found myself never activating them, and there isn't very much Godfarer's Gift at the moment. These can help smooth out early draws. They can help, again, like a bit like an Opt, while still giving you the colourless mana you need, but could be potentially just almost more Meandering Rivers or other cards, but we'll give them a go. In the sideboard here, we've got Four Knight of Grace, which is a creature package that we can bring in against the either the black control decks, which they just have a very hard time dealing with and will normally just get them dead very quickly. Importantly, if they are playing like more of a mid-range version, we still get to have even the Gifted Aetherborns, for example, just can't even get through this. First strike and a 3-2 if they have a black permanent is a very good rate for 2 mana. And the 2 toughness is important. These sort of cards sometimes end up having 1 toughness, but 2 toughness means it doesn't die to things like Goblin Chain Whirler incidentally, and this does actually block great against red. We've got 2 Invoke the Divines as our Disenchant effect, so we normally either end up using these against vehicles decks as the artifact half, or against the things that are playing their own cast outs and their own Ixalan's Bindings. It's good to be able to answer those at instant speed, and gaining the life is definitely a nice little rider. The alternative of Forsake the Worldly tends not to be we don't really want to cycle it very often. If you're bringing it in, you normally bring it in to hit something. So I think the 4-life rider is more important. Although the not being able to exile does sometimes come up, most notably with Scrapheap Scrounger. Got another Fumigate if we come up against creature matchups. 2 Lyra Doorbringer. I think, again, there's quite a lot been said about this one at this point, especially in this deck where sometimes your opponent's forced to leave in creature removal just because of how scared they are of Lyra, and that's just a great spot for us to be in. And if they don't have the couple of removal spells they've left in, just completely take over games, especially against decks like Mono Red. 3 Negate, so we can use that against the other control decks, and sometimes we bring it in actually against the decks with their Planeswalker packages post-board. We've got a Supreme Will, which is just our kind of catch-all answer. We're bringing in if we don't really have something we don't particularly want in the main deck. And it can be another counter spell for these grindier matchups. A Nezahal Primal Tide, that's your big hitter. Once you stick this in play against a control deck, they're going to have a really hard time answering it, and that the drawing an extra card every time they play a non-creature spell is just going to help push you so far ahead, especially when they've taken out most of their hard removal spells. And we've got 1 Silent Gravestone as a hedge for graveyard decks. Alright, I'm really excited to see how these goes. I think this deck's really good, and I will catch you in the games.